Hello everybody and welcome back once again. In this video I want to talk about how I created this image of Cathedral Cave in the Langdale Valley, which is both a black and white and an HDR. But first let me share with you the story behind how I came to capture this image in the first place. This photograph was taken on a commission for a friend of mine called Joseph, and Joseph had two stipulations. The first was it was to be a shot of the main cave within the Cathedral Cave complex, and the second one was it was to be delivered in black and white. Now, I'd never been to Cathedral Cave before this, but last week I paid a visit, and let's see how I got on. So this is Cathedral Cave, or Cathedral Cavern, or Cathedral Quarry as it's also sometimes known. And I'm going to show you around a little bit, but nothing really prepared me for just how dark it is in here. But the main features are, we've got a great big window that's allowing some light in, not an awful lot, I'll be honest with you. And then in the centre of the cave is this huge sort of central column, if you like. At the highest point I estimate it's going to be somewhere in the region of about 40 or 50 metres high, and it's going to be roughly the same size corner to corner as well. Yeah, so let's get on and see if we can get some photos. It had originally been my plan to spend a little bit of time exploring the cavern shooting handheld, but it's just too dark to do that. If the footage looks grainy, it's because I've had to bump the ISO right up to 6400. So I've set the camera up on a tripod and I'm just trying a few different compositions. Now, one of the first problems that I've got is I'm finding it very difficult to compose the images because it's so dark I can't see very well. Now, normally I would use the LCD, but I am finding it a little bit easier using the eyepiece. The second thing is, of course, that there's this enormous dynamic range in here, so not so much in here. But what I want with this shot is I do want to retain some detail in the window. And so I've had to be taking multiple exposures. Now, the highest I'm exposing is around 30 seconds, and that provides enough detail, I think, inside the cave, but of course that blows out the detail outside. And so I've been taking exposures from 30 seconds all the way down to a quarter of a second. And when I get down to a quarter of a second, I've managed to retain all the detail in the window. Now, I've done exposures at a stop all the way down. So I've got all of the information that I need, and when I get home I'm going to have to take those exposures and blend them together somehow. Maybe with HDR, but in this case I might have to do some luminosity masking in Photoshop. The light levels are starting to come up now. It's actually really quite a nice day outside. That is making it easier for me now, so I can now go back to composing the image on the back of the LCD. I'm going to spend a little bit more time trying out a few different compositions, so I've got a few different options. Now I'm going to head home and we'll get these onto the computer and see what we can do to process them. So that was Cathedral Cave. Pretty cool, I think. I can't believe that was my first ever visit. I'll definitely go back at some point in the future. Anyway, when I got home, I uploaded those images onto the computer. For that particular scene, I had 7 shots ranging from 30 seconds all the way down to half a second. The vision that I had for this particular photo before I went out onto location was to create quite a dark image that had lots of shadows in it, but to retain the full detail in the window. And so if we look at the 30-second exposure, the brightest of those exposures, you can still see that there's a lot of dark areas in this. In fact, really the only area with any detail is the area immediately in front of the window where the light has spilled out and highlighted the rocks and the ground. You can also see that the sky through the window is completely burnt out. There's no detail in that whatsoever. Now, if we look at the darkest exposure, the half-second exposure, there is absolutely no detail in any part of this image apart from the window itself. And in this case, there's absolutely no blown highlights whatsoever. I've managed to retain full detail in that view through the window. Now, when it came to blending these images together, I was prepared to try and do it manually using some luminosity masking in Photoshop. But I thought before I did that, I would at least let Lightroom have a go at creating an HDR image. Now, my main concern was this bright area around the window. I wasn't sure if Lightroom was going to do a good job of blending that in and capturing the level of detail that I wanted. But anyway, I gave it a go. So what I did first was I selected the brightest exposure, the one at 30 seconds. I selected the darkest exposure, the one at half a second, and then I picked the one bang in the middle, which was 4 seconds. So of the 7, I only used 3 images. When Lightroom does the HDR merge, it creates a DNG, a digital negative, and that file contains a huge amount of information, all of that information from those 3 exposures. And this is that DNG file. Now, it looks as though both the highlights and the shadows have been clipped, but critically the file contains all of that information that's going to allow me to recover detail in both of those areas. Obviously, this HDR file is a color image, so the next thing that I needed to do was to convert that to black and white, and then I could walk through my standard workflow. And this typically involves pulling out detail from the highlights, lifting a little bit more detail out of the shadows, tuning the exposure a little bit, and then adding a bit of clarity to give those midtones a bit of extra punch. So this was essentially the finished image. And I was really pleased with it. I was actually surprised at just how good a job Lightroom had done at blending those 3 images together. And most critically, that area around the window where I was concerned came out absolutely perfect. There was no hint of any light leaking, any odd highlight areas around that. And so I decided that this was the image that I was going to present to Joseph. Now, I did present this to Joseph along with 4 other images that I took, and this is the one that he chose as his favorite, which was essentially a variation on the one that I've just shown you. Now, Joseph did make one observation about the images when I presented them to him, and that was on the inclusion of that steel safety rope that's there to stop people from clambering over the rocks. Now, I felt that that rope was part of the story of that particular location of the cave itself. But Joseph felt that it was a little bit out of place, and so he asked me to remove it. And of course, that's exactly what I did. So I fired that up in Photoshop, and then I spent a very long time painstakingly cloning that out using the clone stamp. So that's the story of how I created this black and white HDR shot of Cathedral Cave. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do give it a thumbs up. It does help the channel out. Now, if you would like to commission me to capture a photograph specifically for you and to share that story in a video, then you can find details on how you can do that in the description below. And all that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.